Star Fox Assault delivered an action-packed yet somewhat controversial experience when it zoomed onto the GameCube in 2005. In some ways, this game felt like a response to elements of backlash against Star Fox Adventures 3 years earlier, a game that I personally really enjoyed, but for the most part kept Fox out of his Arwing and exploring Dinosaur Planet on foot in a slower-paced, puzzle-solving adventure. Star Fox Assault brought back action-packed Arwing missions with guns blazing right at the start of the first level, but for some players, this excitement felt short-lived or like another bait-and-switch. You see, the second mission of Assault immediately put Fox McCloud back on the ground, though at least this time he got to keep his blaster.
Why couldn't I bring my blaster?
And a rocket launcher, and occasionally a terrible controlling landmaster.
It's always the same with you, Fox.
Anyway, some players were left with deja vu and the same complaint all over again, that Fox spends way too much time out of his Arwing. But just how valid is that complaint? I decided to replay this game right after beating Star Fox Adventures again for a previous video to try and get a sense for how much time you actually spend in the Arwing, what percentage of the overall game that is, and how all of this compares to Star Fox Adventures Arwing content. The results are in, and I'm able to report that in my most recent playthrough of the Star Fox Assault campaign, I only spent about 42 minutes in the Arwing, and that includes a semi-lengthy final boss battle relative to the rest of the game, and some optional flying bits. There isn't even a full hour of Arwing gameplay in this Star Fox game, which is kind of crazy, but all the math behind this isn't as obvious as it might seem. I think the overall structure of this game is kind of fascinating, so let's way overanalyze this. Please remember to subscribe to the growing channel for more retro and modern gaming analysis content. There's plenty more on the way. Now there's a lot to unpack here, but I want to start by saying that I think the flying missions that do exist in Star Fox Assault are actually pretty good, far better than the space missions in Star Fox Adventures. In fact, I think I actually like Star Fox Assault more than most people do, since I don't hate the on-foot missions like others seem to, with the exception of the Aperoid homeworld level. We'll come back to that. I think the ground segments are a bit awkward and clunky, but generally forgiving and sort of fun once you get the hang of the controls. The Landmaster is a different story. That always feels awkward to me no matter how much time you spend in it, which is thankfully very little. So anyways, let's break down the details here. There are 10 missions in the game that are each split between some combination of on-foot, Landmaster, and Arwing gameplay. There's also a few very strange segments where Fox is standing on a ship shooting at things with a turret. I'm not sure why they had him literally stand on the wing instead of giving him an actual turret in the back of a ship or something, who knows. I'm going to count these as on-foot missions because you're, well, on foot. So here is a full breakdown of the game timings. I'm not going to read through all of these. You can pause the video to check out the data if you really want, but let's just focus on the totals at the bottom. And yes, there is some minor rounding going on here. During my run, I only spent about 42 minutes in the Arwing, about 50 minutes on foot, and 12 or so minutes in the Landmaster. I would guess that the Arwing timing can vary by about 5 to 10 minutes depending on your difficulty level, skill, playstyle, and whether you die, but remember, many of these segments are on rails with fairly predetermined lengths. There's also a couple optional Arwing segments, such as on Dinosaur Planet, where you can jump into your Arwing to help crowd control the sky if you so choose. I did include a couple of minutes of that here, which is plenty for the simple task of helping out your squad. There's also 2 missions in the game that have no Arwing segments at all. The on-foot missions, on the other hand, those are more open-ended and may vary widely in terms of timing based on your skill level and how well you understand the mission objectives. There's one mission in the game that's a real wildcard with the gameplay timing. We'll come back to that in a moment. Now for context, I replayed the entire campaign on the medium or silver difficulty, which actually does impact the timing a lot here. For example, bronze is a much quicker and easier playthrough, so this isn't even the shortest possible timing. I should also note that I have beaten this game once or twice in the past, so there is a built-in bias here in that I generally understand the flow of most of the levels going in, but I'm by no means an expert on this game. Obviously, since I was replaying the whole campaign just to time it, I wasn't exactly lingering around to soak everything in, but I'm also not good enough at this game for anything close to a speedrun. So based on this data, you do indeed spend more time on foot than in the Arwing. In fact, you spend about as much time on foot as the Arwing and Landmaster combined. Now, you might be thinking, well, Star Fox 64 is also a short game and doesn't have much more than an hour or so of Arwing gameplay in one playthrough either. That's semi-true, but Star Fox 64 has branching paths and criteria that unlock different mission combinations, creating incentive to replay the game multiple times to see everything, and all of those missions are vehicle-centric. I think the Landmaster missions in Star Fox 64 are also more enjoyable than the small bits of Landmaster action in Assault,
I guess I should be thankful.
which take place in weirdly crowded, circular levels that are awkward to navigate. So all these numbers surprised me a little bit and prompted a second question, which is, does Star Fox Adventures actually have as much Arwing combat as Star Fox Assault? Even though Assault is supposed to feature Arwing gameplay as a focal point? The short answer is no, but the slightly longer answer is that the difference isn't as wide as you might think. I replayed all 5 short spaceflight missions in Star Fox Adventures and the final boss, which is randomly in outer space after spending 15 hours on the surface, and I initially clocked in the total Arwing time at around 12 or 13 minutes. However, during the full campaign, you're also forced to fly back to Dinosaur Planet after visiting every broken off piece of the world in outer space, and that does add another 5 minutes or so, bringing the total required Arwing experience to about 17 minutes, maybe slightly more. That's right, there's only about 25 to 30 more minutes of Arwing gameplay in Star Fox Assault than Star Fox Adventures, which is kind of wild to think about. It certainly doesn't feel that way when you play both games back to back, since Star Fox Adventures is a long game, but it is true regardless. It's also worth noting that all these numbers are greatly skewed by the 9th mission of the game, which I honestly think is one of the worst levels in any major Nintendo game. I really do like Star Fox Assault overall, but this mission takes the whole game down a notch for me. Every mission in Assault can be beaten in about 7 to 10 minutes if you just focus on the objectives, but for some reason the 9th mission is this massive labyrinth headache of a level on the Aperoid homeworld. Even after you know what you're doing, this level can take upwards of 25 minutes to beat, and the vast majority of that is endless on-foot enemy waves in narrow hallways and awkward landmaster traversal. If you die or accidentally fall off a ledge while on foot, you have to start from the beginning. Even the final few minutes of Arwing at the end of the level are not great. You're flying under the space station in circles trying to blow up 6 stationary targets above you, and so it's awkward to keep flying downwards while targeting upwards. It's not great, and this mission in isolation is almost a quarter of the entire length of the game, even after you already know how to beat it. This level feels like they realized the game was way too short and just added a super long and convoluted level at the end to increase the game length. The real reason I'm dwelling on this though is because if you remove this level from my playthrough, the on-foot math drops all the way down to about a half an hour or so, making the Arwing the primary form of gameplay by a small margin. So the core problem here is that Star Fox Assault is just way too short in general, with no major incentive to replay it, unless you want to achieve the highest ranks on different difficulty levels. I should mention there is a local multiplayer mode to add some more content, but I never found it all that interesting personally. Your first time through, you might get 3 or 4 hours of gameplay out of the campaign, but this might be one of the shortest full-sized games Nintendo has ever released for one of their major franchises. I think most people who have played the game realize it's too short, but again, I bring this up because I think the actual ratios of gameplay here are not that bad if you discard the 9th mission. It's just that there isn't nearly enough gameplay to begin with. For example, if there were 20 missions with branching paths instead of 10, you could have at least 2 or 3 hours of Arwing gameplay plus a few hours of on-foot and Landmaster gameplay, which isn't too bad when compared to other action titles of the time. Remember, not all games used to be 100 hours long, play it until you're bored experiences. You could also make longer missions with checkpoints. And part of the reason I wanted to figure all this out is that I would actually love to see a follow-up to Star Fox Assault in roughly the same style. I think if you polished up the on-foot missions to feel closer to something like Ratchet & Clank or other third-person action games, this structure could work really well. There's a good amount of variety and allows you to have much more creative mission structures. For example, I think it's pretty cool when the game lets you freely choose during a mission when to jump into your Arwing to help out in the sky, versus battle on foot or even to use the Landmaster and clear out enemies. The GameCube hardware sort of limited the scope of this approach, but I think on more modern hardware this could be really cool, and we're way overdue for a new Star Fox. The ground missions are also hampered by wonky movement controls and generic objectives and weapons, so these would have to be improved as well. Although I'm harsh on these ground missions, I do think they somehow add up to more than the sum of their parts. The music is great and the environments are often colorful. Even if the graphics aren't as good as Star Fox Adventures 3 years earlier, there's plenty to blow up and things move along at a good clip. The targeting and aiming are pretty forgiving, so it all kind of comes together in a messy but fun experience. As a side note, I also think it's a bit strange that none of the Landmaster or on-foot missions are more forward-moving or semi-on rails. In Star Fox 64, when you drive the Landmaster, you're generally moving forward, sometimes while literally following rails of a train, which allows for cool, semi-scripted events and lets you focus on blowing things up. In Assault, when you're on foot or in the Landmaster, you're usually exploring a semi-open or circular, almost arena-style level to eliminate targets, which creates overly simplified scenarios and traversal. I think if they added more forward-moving on-foot missions with a bit of platforming and tighter controls, paired with some more dramatic Landmaster missions, you could really have an amazing sequel to this game. So what about you? What did you think of Star Fox Assault? Would you love to see another Star Fox with these same gameplay types and varieties? Would you prefer another vehicle-only style game like Star Fox 64? Leave a comment and let's discuss.